Today you're going to learn how to use Adobe Photoshop CC 2020 from absolute scratch, and you're going to learn how to create this poster for my upcoming music video. Hey y'all, Gary Simon here. Now, for my regular subscribers, you're probably wondering, why am I covering Adobe Photoshop if I'm a front-end development and UI UX channel? Well, I love Photoshop. I used to use it all the time, and I figured I can make an exception for at least one video a year to cover Photoshop CC 2020. I used to create courses, so I'm very, I'm skilled in it, and I know I can help out absolute beginners for sure. So we're going to be creating that poster that I showed you here at the beginning, and we're going to create it from all of these various resources, these other photographs and screenshots from the video. And we're going to do that, what it's called photo compositing or photo manipulation in a sense. And so I'm going to show you exactly how to get started if you've never used Adobe Photoshop once in your life. All right, so there's a lot that we're going to cover, but Photoshop in itself, there's thousands of features. We're not going to touch on all of them. So therefore, this is a crash course. So what's exciting is I'm going to be teaching all the fundamentals, and the fundamentals alone will allow you to really go quite far and create stuff like this, and we're going to do it from scratch. So as always, make sure to subscribe and also check out the video that I'm releasing in a couple days from now, which is my retro wave music video, my guitar play reveal video here on Monday the 9th of December 2019. All right, let's get started. Before we begin, this episode is sponsored by Linode. Now, whether you're a seasoned developer or just a beginner, you can use Linode. You can start from scratch and fully customize your server, or use Linode's one-click apps to deploy pre-built setups like cPanel. cPanel and WHM is a tool that allows you to go from creating individual websites to scaling and managing as many servers as you need. With cPanel and WHM, you can manage your Linode servers through an easy graphical user interface and enjoy free SSL, backups, email, and database management, website builders, and more. So sign up with the link in the description to get a $20 credit on your new Linode account with code DESIGNC19. All right, so we have a couple things here. In the background, I have Adobe Photoshop open, and in the front, I have the footage that we have to work with in a folder here. I've provided that in a zip file, and you can find that in the YouTube description. You can download it so you can work along with me. Trust me, it's much better to actually work with me as opposed to just watching and not doing. It really helps solidify and build the muscle memory so you can try to learn these things a little bit better by doing. Also, there's a couple other assets. We're going to be using 3 different fonts. There's a link to these. I'm going to put that in the description once again. And also there's a kind of like a grid vector file that is on this website address, and also a concrete texture. And don't worry, you don't have to worry about those right now. We'll get to those I just, when the time comes, but I just wanted to point that out. So the first thing we're going to do, because we already have a photograph to work with, is to open the photograph in Photoshop. And there's many ways to do it. You can go to File, Open, or you could just drag from here the photo in Photoshop, and it will load right up just like that. All right, so this photo I thought was so cool because I took a picture with my cell phone, my Samsung Galaxy S8, which is already outdated, but I thought it was really cool. It's a little bit grainy because it's low light, but I didn't care because I know for this particular image, I wanted it to look old school from the 80s. So grain, in low light level conditions, it's not a big deal to me. So the very first thing that I think we'll do very quickly is I'm just going to outline what the interface in Photoshop is all about. First thing, go to Window, Workspace, and you can choose the default, which is Essentials, and you can choose these different workspaces, which changes and shows panels based on what your interest is. For us, we're doing a poster, so that falls under the category of graphic design. So I chose graphic and web. So let me just go ahead real quickly. I'm going to switch to Essentials and then go back to Workspace and choose Graphic and Web. And that way, any changes I made, they're not going to be made anymore. So this is kind of the default layout. You may have an extra panel here on top of layers. I got rid of that one. Right here, you can see if you come down here, you can choose Close or Close Tab Group. I really want to see a lot of layers, so my Layers panel is real large. And over here, so that's our layers. We're going to be working there a lot. It's kind of essential to Photoshop. Also up here we have characters, and so if you want to have type, which we're going to have type, we modify things here. Over here we have our tool set. Sometimes it looks like this. I like mine expanded to 2 columns, just it's a little bit easier for me. And then we have our main canvas area where we do all of our design work. I could go on and on about this, but it's not really pertinent, especially for a crash course. So the first thing that we want to ask ourselves is, what orientation do we want this poster to be in? Most posters, they're in a portrait mode, or they're taller than they are wide. And so right here, we have the opposite. We have a landscape mode photograph. So how do we change that? Well, we go up to image, and we can go to image size. Now, image size will simply let you resize the image, but it's going to basically keep the same proportions from left to right. So if I change, this is a 4K resolution photo, if I downgrade it to 2000 or a 2K res and hit enter, it just shrinks everything down. That's not what we want. What we want is image canvas size. So in canvas size, we can choose, we can notice the width is much greater than the height, 56 versus 27. So we kind of want to flip those around, although I don't want it to be real tall. So a number that I'm going to use is 50, no, we're going to use 30 for the width, and we'll try 50 for the height. All right. So there's other options here that you could see. You don't have to really worry about these, especially for this tutorial in the crash course. So we're just going to hit OK, and it's going to warn you the new canvas size is smaller than the current canvas size. Some clipping will occur. Hit proceed. And now if I zoom out holding Alt in my mouse scroll wheel, we can see the new orientation of the canvas. All right, so first thing, if you want to try to move this layer around and you do that, it's going to give you this little notification. A currently selected layer is a background layer. Notice it says background right here. You cannot move a background layer or change its stacking order, blending mode, or opacity. So when it says background like that, and that will happen when you open up just a flat graphic file like a JPG file, which is what this is, a GIF, a PNG, etc. It's always going to be a background file. It's just going to be one layer. Everything's on one layer. You want to convert that to a normal layer. All right, or you could have right-clicked. If I undo, Control-Z, you could right-click and say layer from background, hit OK, and then now it's its own layer. We can move it around in a sense. Now, notice what happened though. We've lost that image, and that's essentially what we don't want to happen. So what we can do instead is we can go back to where that image was, and I can just drag it on top, and we can have the option to scale it up, and we'll select the move tool, and when we scale, you hold Alt and then just drag up, and now we have this other layer. We can get rid of this layer, and now we have this checkered background. The checkered background, you'll see often, means there's no pixel data here. It's just transparent. So what we want to do, we don't really have to worry about the background for now, but if we wanted to make it black, for instance, we can create a new layer. So you can create a new layer through a keyboard shortcut, or come over here and just choose new layer on the layer panel. Again, if I'm working with panels that you don't see, just go to Window and find the name of the panel here. All right, so we could also create a new layer by hitting Control, Shift, and N, and that will give us a new layer. And it's a good idea to name your layers, but because this is a quick crash course, I'm probably not going to do that. So now I can just take this in the bottom, just click and drag, and now it's at the bottom. So if we fill it with a color, which we can do by left-clicking and dragging out, if it's showing a gradient tool for you, it may not. We could choose the paint bucket tool. All right. Now here's our foreground and our background color. So if you want to use the paint bucket tool, whatever's in your foreground color, you can switch these by clicking this little icon here. We can go ahead and click them, by the way, to change the color. So you could change the hue, the darkness versus the lightness, and also the saturation. So this is very desaturated. This is very saturated to the right. I'm just going to make it black. So I'm going to hit OK, and then left click. There we go. So here's our image so far. And one thing that I want to do, notice we have this TV. I want the TV in the shot. But I also want to have this element, this little, triangle. I want this to be in the middle. If, for instance, you ever found yourself wanting to flip things around, hit Control T on the layer that you want to flip around, right click and choose Flip Horizontal. All right, that still doesn't really help us. Just select the Move tool after that to apply that effect, by the way. That doesn't help us because we're still in the same situation, but I did want to show you just how to flip. So for now, just keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to eventually cut this TV out and put it somewhere more around here. But for now, I kind of like how this looks. Remember, we can always hit Control T and scale things up a little bit more if we want. I think right around here is pretty good. People are texting me. But I think right here is very good. So we're just going to align everything to the top as it is right here. So the next step, what I want to do is take this floor. Notice the floor right here. I want to extend that all the way down. Now, there's multiple ways that we can go about doing this. By the way, notice this little icon. It's like a little document on the side of this layer. If we right-click and choose Rasterize Layer, that will go away, and then that will allow us to do perform the next step, which is we want to get rid of these wires right here. We want to make them disappear and just make it look like a flat floor like the rest of it, okay? So in order to do that, let's zoom up here a bit. In order to do that, what we can do is there's multiple ways to achieve things in Photoshop. I mean, there's so many features. I'm going to show you a couple ways here. So the immediate tool for something like this would be the Spot Healing Brush tool. And notice it's a certain size. If we hit the little down arrow up here where it says 50, the size of the brush currently is 50. We can increase that. You can notice it gets larger. And you want to choose something that really covers the area around whatever it is you wanted to get removed. So the item itself, like in this case, a wire, and a bit of the item or the area around it. So 75 or 70 or so is going to be a good size. Hardness, if we choose hardness, notice how this icon changes. So it's a very like feathered brush if the hardness is 0. And it's a very hard brush if it's not. So you can't really notice the difference between the two in this case, but when we use an actual paintbrush, you can notice the difference. In fact, let me just show you. If we use the brush tool, which is like a paintbrush tool, and we choose one of these presets here, like soft round, and we make the foreground white, that's a very soft brush. So notice how it looks. It's very like a gradient almost. So if we change this to hard, very hard brush. So I just wanted you to, to understand the difference between those two. So we'll hit Control Z 2 times to back up. So let's go back to our Spot Healing Brush tool, and it's like magic. If I just left click, it goes away. It disappears. Now I'm going to choose a feathered brush. And that way it kind of fades off a little bit instead of it being like a hard stop. I don't care really that this just stops right there. You're not going to really notice it anyways. But if we keep going down, we just got rid of that line or that wire very easily. These are going to be a tad bit more tricky. So let's try to come down here. All right, that did a very good job of getting rid of that line. Some of these others, it may not do a great job. So we have some little bit of discoloration in this area. That's okay though. And sometimes it just won't get rid of some elements like you think it would. Like that. So what we could use instead is a clone stamp tool. All right, so the clone stamp tool looks the same, but what it allows you to do is to sample a certain area around the area that you want to replace. And you can hold Alt and then left click right around there. Then we can left click and drag, and it will literally replace whatever is over here with whatever is sampled on that side. It's literally cloning the pixels. And so if you do it well enough, you can make it a little bit better and believable that this is just a floor without anything that was over there. And to make this really effective, you want to clone stamp around the same area. so that's not too different. So if I clone stamped up here and then started, that looks completely ridiculous, right? So you want to clone stamp around the areas that make the most sense. I don't really care that that's extending beneath that area either. It's not a big deal. So you can just take areas around here, and the fact that it may not be perfect, not a big deal, because we're going to be really changing up this image big time anyhow. So now what we want to do is we want to extend this floor all the way down. And there's a few things that you can do in order to extend elements. So for instance, if I take what's called the rectangular Marquee Tool, you also have an elliptical Marquee Tool and several others. What it allows you to do is to create selections on a given layer. So it creates the whole marching ant. So if you left click and drag, you'll see the marching ants thing. And then we can take the move tool and move things around like that. We want to create a selection of just the area, for instance, that we want to take down. One thing you can do is go to Edit and Content Aware Scale. And if it's doing this thing where it's really enlarging everything, you only want us to go down, just hold Shift and go like that. Now, if we use the Move tool, that doesn't look very natural, does it? Because we're really stretching it real far and the pixels just look ridiculous, right? So that's not going to work. I'm going to back up there. What we want to use is a very similar texture. And I found one online. There's a lot of different texture sites. And the one I want to use right here is called, it's from unsplash.com. Check the link in the description on YouTube while you're watching and go to this URL right here. I'm going to do the same right here. Mine's off screen. This is the concrete texture. So when you're trying to do this sort of photo manipulation that we're about to, or this compositing, you want to try to make sure that you're using a texture that is of around the same resolution. You want it to be the same size, like ours is 4K, this is also going to be large. And also something that just looks the same, right? So it seems like the texture here could pass for being a texture that looks right here, like the same over on the floor. So what we want to do is download this. Download, and it's a free download. You can say attribution is appreciated. So, I mean, if you want to attribute people, that's great. This is the person, Dana, who created this. And I'm going to show it in folder here. And we're just going to drag that on to our composition. There we go. So I'm going to select the Move tool. We'll move this thing down. And we obviously have a lot of work, but don't worry, it's not a lot of work, but there's a lot that needs to be done to make this look believable, like it's a floor that's continuing down. So the first thing that I would do is try to get the perspective right. Right now, this is just it's like somebody took a picture of a floor or some piece of metal straight on. But our floor has perspective, because if you look at the floor, we can notice that there's a wall right here, and then there's probably a floor that starts right here. And then based on the camera angle and the person or myself, I was just standing on the floor looking at it this way. So we want to try to get the perspective correct. So to do that, we can hit Control T. I'm going to hold Alt and the scroll wheel to get out a little bit. We can hit the space bar and also left click to move our position around. And what we want to do is create a perspective transform on this. So you hit Control T, right click, we can choose perspective. So if I come down or move this up, we can left click and drag out to create basically like a perspective view. Like that. So select the Move tool up here. And I'd say that's pretty good right there. You can go back to it and make further adjustments. For instance, I might take this and drag it up, and then right click, go to perspective, push this out like that. It's all up to you and how you want to do it. All right. So we have that done. Next up, we need to kind of blend these together. If we don't, we're going to see a hard line right here. So the way we could do that, we're going to take our base layer and drag it by left clicking and dragging up top. And we want to feather the bottom of this. We don't want it to be a hard edge. There's a couple ways. Now, the next thing I'm about to teach you is extremely important. It's an important concept to understand in Photoshop, and that is destructive versus non-destructive editing. So let me give you an example of what a destructive edit would look like. So what we want to achieve is we want to take our eraser tool, which is right here, and we want to choose something around 460 pixels around there, and also a feathered brush. So hardness is 0. So if I take this and I get rid of, for instance, the bottom here, now we can just see the background, but let me back up a couple times. Let me hide the background layer. And if I just left click and drag, hold shift to make sure that it stays like on this horizontal path, we can see that we have that feathered area. But this is a destructive edit because the changes are actually baked into the pixels that make up this layer. So if we did a bunch of work afterwards and we had work that we wanted to keep, but then we decided, this feather should change, we want to change it in some way, we would lose all our work if we hit edit undo, if we went back far enough. And that way we would be completely screwed in a sense. We would have to redo all the other work afterwards. It's a destructive edit. You don't want to do that. What you want to do instead is the non-destructive way, which is to create a clipping mask. So at the bottom of the layers panel, we'll see that there's a button here and it's called a layer mask, not a clipping mask, sorry. And when you do that, it changes the layer preview right here and adds this white rectangle that is currently selected. You can select between both of them. Left click here, it selects it. Right click there, it selects it as well. So this section right here, it's currently selected on the mask. It works in white and black values. And what that means is, for instance, it's all white here, so therefore we see everything. If it's black, we won't see certain things. So we can use the paintbrush tool to paint on this. And right now it's a hard brush. We can see hardness is 100%. So now it just takes the opacity completely out of the area that I drew in. And you can see the preview, it's tiny little thumbnail right there. But this is not destructive because we can always adjust this area. For instance, if I change our foreground here to white, guess what? We can make it all come back. And we can do this at any point. So, you know, if in 2 hours I did all this other work, I can always just come back and just adjust the layer mask. And that way it's non-destructive. So hopefully you understand that now. So we're going to go back to black and we want to feather. So we want to choose our paintbrush with a hardness of 0, a feathered soft round brush. And let's come up to like 300 pixels. And then just get rid of that portion right there. All right, very, very simple. So now if we take our concrete, I'll just call this floor. You can double click on the name of a layer to change it. Hit enter. We'll move that up. So now at least there's a nice transition between the two, even though the values or the brightness and darkness are not the same, as well as the hue. So let's work on that now. So notice right here, we have this little icon on the layer. We can see on like layer 1, for instance, it doesn't have that icon. Well, it's because we dragged in that photograph of the concrete. And when you do that, it automatically converts it to what's called a smart object layer. All right, so when you apply, say, if we go to image adjustments, like a hue and saturation on it, and we want to hit colorize because it's already white and black. When we want to apply, we'll try to make this like purple or so right around there, and then maybe take the brightness and contrast down, or the lightness rather. When we hit OK, notice it has a smart filter. So smart filters are a non-destructive way of changing things because listen, once we click this eye, which is for the visibility, it goes right back to this way. So let me just show you real quickly. You don't have to follow along just at this part, just watch. So this is the non-destructive way, but there's a destructive way, which you don't want to do, but I want to show you it just so you can avoid it in the future. So if we hit Control Z to get rid of that, and we were to right click and choose Rasterize Layer, that is no longer a smart object layer. And so this is just a regular layer, just with regular pixels, all right? If we went to the same area, image adjustments, and we chose hue and saturation, and we did the same edits real quick, and then we hit OK, it's baked into, those changes now are baked into that layer, and we can no longer change it down the road, all right? So I just, I don't want to waste too much time, but this is very, very important stuff to remember. All right, so I'm going to back up, and we're going to do that same thing. Now, there's another way. Make sure we get to the part where it's a smart object layer. There's also a way to apply what are called adjustment layers, and we could do the same thing. So we can go to Window, Adjustments, and we can see these are icons, and they're all the same stuff that's listed out in images adjustments right here. So we see hue and saturation. Hue and saturation is this icon. We can click it. And this time it adds a layer on top, and it's basically the same thing where we can adjust it, choose colorize. And the thing that's different about this adjustment layer, we can move it around. And anything that falls beneath it will be affected. So notice how it changed the hue and saturation of this layer because I moved it up. So we can move this down. And one way to stop it affecting other layers is to choose this little down little icon with the square. And that way it will only affect the layer right underneath it. So these are just important concepts to understand because they will become important. Okay, so the first thing we did is we changed the lightness and the hue to try to match up as much as possible. And you may have to do this very fine tuning. And I'm just left clicking and dragging to where you're getting roughly in the same area. So you may have to adjust the saturation a bit. And I think right around there is looking pretty decent. All right. Now, of course, we have this area where there's light and it kind of stops right there. But remember, we're also going to be placing stuff on top. Like there's going to be a picture of my goofy self with these big, large glasses. It's going to be right around here. So, and there's also going to be this weird sort of retro grid on top of it. So if it's not perfect, it's not a big deal to me at this point. Now, one thing that is kind of strange is it's kind of darker over here, and then there's no darkness down here. So we're going to fix that too. So what we'll do is I'm going to create a new layer. So remember, we can come down here, or up here rather, and click the new layer or hit Control-Shift-N. I like shortcuts, so I'll do it that way. And we'll use the brush tool, a large feathered brush. When I mean large, I'm talking large, like 1800 pixels for the size. And we're gonna choose, let's see here, something that's close to and I use the eyedropper tool. So the way this works, I can come up here. It'll select what other, wherever the pixels are that I select here. So I'm just going to come off here to the side, hit OK, and I'm going to start on the very left side, almost outside of the canvas. So if you need to, hold Alt and your scroll wheel to zoom out. And I'm just going to left click, and I'm holding down the entire time to kind of create this effect where we're continuing the lighting that's occurring up here. You can do it multiple times, by the way, as well. And if you want, you could even make it darker. So we're changing the foreground. Maybe we'll go a little bit smaller this time to like 1000. Now that's a little bit too much for my liking. So it's just a tad bit too dark. Come back up. I'm thinking probably only add the real darker stuff down here. Like that. Okay, so as you can see, it's quite subtle. And if we wanted to, we could put this up here. That's probably makes the most sense. We're just going to have this, we'll call this dark fade bottom. Okay. So now that's on top, and it's going on top as opposed to being at the bottom where it kind of cuts off. That doesn't look right. So we'll drag that there, and now it looks much smoother. It looks much more natural. All right, awesome. So Now we have to ask ourselves, what is the next step for this composition? So a lot of this, when you're starting off and you're not even sure, it's going to be trial and error. You're going to be going back and forth, adjusting your settings, hopefully if you've done them in a non-destructive way. But for me, I think what will be interesting is to get the picture of myself out. So we're gonna go back to the resource files for this tutorial, and here I am. I am very ridiculous looking in this. So let me come up here. If we drag it to the top bar, it'll open it up in its own document, and we can see footage from the video that I shot. It's actually pretty grainy, but that's okay. And what we want to do is cut myself out as best we can from the background here. Now in Photoshop, there's a lot of different ways to cut elements out. There's so many tutorials that you can find online, how to cut hair out, because that's a tricky one. And we're going to experiment just to see how, what might be the best way to cut out. And I'm going to show you several different ways. All right, so the first tool I'm going to show you, which is probably the tool we're going to end up using, is up here. If we left click, drag and hold, we could choose the object selection tool. Now this is a tricky sort of image to use because the foreground element, which is myself, that we want to cut out has very similar values compared to the background element surrounding it. So if you look at my head and then the background here, it's like almost indiscernible. But it still does a very good job. So the object selection tool works by left clicking and dragging around the area that you want to select and letting go. Automatically, it does some work in the background to determine, based on contrast, the object that we actually want to cut out. And look how great of a job it did. Now, there are some issues. You may have to do it a couple times, and sometimes it won't ever be perfect. For instance, we can see if I zoom up here, it didn't get this part of the glasses. Look how thick these glasses are, by the way. I bought them from eBay, some legit 80s glasses. So if I take the pen tool and make sure it's in path, if it's on shape, for instance, don't do this, but just watch, it'll create an actual shape. You can see there's a new layer there and everything, and you can give it a fill and a stroke and all that. We want a path. So we change our pen tool to path, and we left click, and we just create Bezier curve. So if the left click, you can left click and drag and hold to create kind of like a curve like that, to try to go over the contour of the image. And then we'll just wrap it around to the beginning anchor point. Right click, choose make selection, and make sure all this stuff is here. We don't want to feather the selection. We want it to be anti-alias, which is mean not jagged. We want it to be smooth. And it's going to be a new selection. No, it's not. It's actually going to be add to this current selection that we have. So we hit OK. There we go. We've just added to that selection. Now we could also see the head is not really perfect. The hair technically extends out here a little bit, but I'm not going to care about that too much. I'm not going to pay attention to that. I am going to add to just to this part because the head is kind of all messed up and misshapen, more so than it is naturally. So I'm just going to create this little shape right here. Right click, make selection. We're going to add the selection, hit OK, and that's much better. Now we can just look a quick look around to see if there's anything else that's really bad. But no, it looks pretty solid. It's missing this part down here, so I'll do that. Right click, make selection, hit enter. Oops, I forgot to add to selection. There we go. Okay, so now what we can do is hit edit copy or Control C, just like you're copying text or something. And we can go back to our main composition, and we'll choose the very top layer, and then when we hit paste, it will automatically go at the top. And then now we can see myself is cut out, and it doesn't look good, admittedly. But that means we just have some work to do. I want this to be larger. I want my face to be kind of the focus of the composition. So what we'll do is hit Control C, or Control T rather, to transform, and hold Alt and scale up. Now normally you would never want to do this because this is a rastered image. So for instance, this layer, you can see it has no little icons. It's not a smart object layer. It's a rastered layer. And so when you try to make a layer and the contents inside of it larger than what it is as a rastered layer, then you will get pixelation. Pixelation just means the quality and it'll look grainy or whatever. I'm allowing myself to do that just because this is going to be an 80s retro sort of movie poster, and they're naturally grainy anyways. I want grain just to make it look like it's older. So that's just one caveat. So Control T, hold Alt, scale that sucker up like right around there. Looking at my reference image, I'm thinking probably like right around here would be good. And select Move Tool, and that will apply it. So especially like older movie posters and stuff, back in the day, they did this thing where they would kind of take the eraser tool. You don't have to do this, and like fade out the person from the background or whatever. We're going to do that. But what did I just do? That was a destructive edit, right? Because I literally got rid of pixels on the actual, rastered image itself. We want, what was it? We wanted a clipping mask. Layer mask rather. So you click that little icon. You can also do that by right clicking as well on the layer. And here we go. Everything's white so we see everything, but we want to make this with our brush black. So make sure this is actual black all the way. And now with a large brush is about 1000 pixels, that'll work. We're going to get rid of just a certain portion of myself. And you can left go and left click and do this a few times if you wish. I don't want to see any hard edges from the bottom of my shirt or anything, so I got rid of those. And then there I go. Still looks bad because it's really desaturated. It doesn't really fit with the composition, but we're going to fix that, so don't worry. In fact, we're going to fix that now. So we have ourselves placed in here into this composition, and we want to change a few properties such as the levels or the curves. So what we can do with our adjustments, go to Windows Adjustments if you don't see it. It's right here. And we'll choose, the first thing I think we'll choose, let's see, we'll do Hue and Saturation because that allows us to change the color. So we can bump the saturation up. Oh, by the way, notice it's changing everything else. We want to choose this icon so that it only affects the layer beneath it, this layer of myself. So if I change the saturation, we can kind of bump it up a little bit. But really, what we want to change is the saturation of the other stuff. Now, this does have color in it. I don't really care if we just choose Colorize. I want it to have a very similar color, kind of maybe like right around there. And you can adjust the saturation as you wish. A lot of these changes that you're going to be working with in Photoshop are subjective versus objective. Objective is like, yeah, that is 100% wrong. It's outside the scope of opinion. There's not many things that you can do in design and art that are objective. But so these values right here, it's all up to you. I think right around there is probably fine, but it really doesn't it just doesn't stick out enough. Let's try affecting the curve. So we can have multiple adjustment layers affecting, let's click this down icon, the same layer. All right, so the curves, if we left click and drag on this line, we can make it darker and make it more contrast. I think I kind of like that right there. But still, I feel like I'm too dark, and I wanted to make it look like this LED light strip I created, that's like a triangle light strip. I wanted to make it look like it's illuminating this side of my face. All right, so let's do that. What we'll do is we're going to create a new type of layer here. And so if I hit Control-Shift-N for a new layer, by default, because we already have these adjustment layers on top of it, it has this little button checked off here, this checkbox called Use Previous Layers to create a clipping mask. That's what we want. We want that checked on. We'll hit OK. Now, anything that I draw, like if I start taking the brush tool and I make it this pink color and I start drawing out here, guess what? Even though you see it in the preview right there, you don't see it over here. That's because it's a clipping mask and it will only show up inside the contents of this layer right here. So if I start doing this, yes, we can see it. So these are very powerful as well, and you'll be using them a lot if you get into Photoshop. So now what we want to do is illuminate the side of my face, right? But that looks like garbage. I want to make this a little bit smaller, maybe like 750 instead of 1000. And what we can do is we can change this to white, for instance. Right there. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a completely different thing that you haven't heard of yet, and that is called a blending mode. All layers have blending modes and layer groups as well. You'll see layer groups in a second. But blending modes are right here. It's just drop down menu. And what it allows you to do is if you filter through these, I'm just hovering over them, it's going to give you different looks in a sense. Like this one works really well. Overlay, soft light. I think we're going to stick with overlay. And so just notice that now instead of it looking like this, which is garbage, overlay really makes it look like there's a light source coming from behind me. And so one tip that I can give you is when you want to filter through these, just select normal and use your keyboard down and up arrow keys to go through them to see if there's one that you like quickly. I personally like this one quite a bit. Now that was a white color that I used. Real quickly, if you want to go to image adjustments, or you can double click on the right side of the layer. Here's a whole other thing that's starting to show up that I haven't showed you about. Layer styles. All layers have layer styles. You can do things like color overlay, and you can change the color from white to whatever else you specify here. So if like we want to see what it looks like on overlay. That actually won't work. One second, let me hit OK. I'm going to right click and we'll choose Rasterize Layer Style. Go back to overlay. We can see that it's not quite as much of a difference that we had when it was just pure white. So I'm going to back up to there. So making this white with the overlay, I think works out the best. All right, so we can also, if we wanted to, I think it just looks a little bit too white. I kind of want it to look a little bit more purple. We can add another adjustment layer, like hue and saturation, and make sure it's only affecting this layer down here. And we can bump up or change the hue in any direction. I kind of like that, just offsetting it a little bit. One other thing I wanted to do is, if I zoom up here, I kind of want to create a very small area where it looks like there's just the side of me is not going to have that little or this, you know, the area where it's all faded out or made bright. So what I want to do is take the eraser tool, and with this layer selected here, which is the bright part, we can come down and just left click and drag just a little bit, just so it kind of creates a nice sort of effect where this side of my face isn't necessarily lit, or that part right here. That's just a small change I wanted to make. All right. Actually, I may even do that at the top with a larger feather brush because the hair looks a little bit strange. There we go. All right, that's much better in my opinion. Okay, so now continuing on, the next part. Let's get the picture. Actually, we'll do that after. There's a part where I'm playing guitar like in a silhouette sort of look. We're going to do that afterwards. What we'll do now is we're going to get our grid on. So if I go to Google real quickly and I type in retro wave, because this is a retro wave song that I created. it's a certain aesthetic, as it's called, from like the 80s and such. And you see the one thing that's popular are these grids, these 3D sort of grids that are laid out here. So I found we can create a grid if we wanted to on our own in Photoshop, but I found one that was already created in vector format. Vector format basically means you can scale it to any size imaginable and it won't lose quality, essentially. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go back to my document where I have the grid link. It's also going to be in the YouTube description. We'll go back here. We're going to paste that in. And you do need to log in order to download this. I know this is nothing like what we want, but we're going to perspective transform it. I already have a free license that I created. So you are going to have to sign up for a free account here, and then you'll be able to download it. So my download is right there. It's a zip file. So let me move this over. And then what we'll do is we're going to drag the EPS version, which is the vector version, right onto our layer here. Now I'm going to make it larger. Probably right around here. Actually, I'll just go right to here. And then what I'm going to do is right now it's a smart object layer, but I want to get rid of the individual white cells inside. So I'm going to right click and convert to a rasterize layer. And we're going to choose, left click, drag out here, the magic wand tool. And we're going to choose contiguous. So if I don't choose contiguous, oh, yeah, contiguous not checked is what we want. If we just choose any of the white areas. If this were checked, contiguous, it would only select one. So hopefully you understand how that works. All right, so we have all those selected. We're going to hit delete. So now all the white has pretty much got rid of within those cells. So now this color, of course, looks really ugly. We're going to change that as well. Don't worry. What we'll do is we're going to perspective transform it. So to do that, select Move Tool, hit Control T, right click, and we could choose perspective. So I'm going to drag this out here. I'm going to right click, choose Free Transform, drag these in. And again, we can right click perspective, bring this out, take these, bring those out. And I may right click and transform again. And I'm just kind of going back and forth, as you can see, trying to make up my mind. And it is a little bit pixelated, but I'm not going to worry about that now. If we get up here, you can't really tell because we're going to change this up a lot. The first thing I want to do is bring this pretty much down further. Now, what just happened? Basically this layer used to be right here, and it was affecting everything just to this layer. But when I move that off, what happened to these three adjustments layers is they all lost the fact that they're trying to point to one layer. So what we need to do after making that change is make sure each one of these, if I click here, is pointing where they need to be. It's a little frustrating that it does that, but that's how things work out. All right, so this was actually the original color, that blue color, so that's why it looks a little bit different. So what we want to do here is try to experiment with the color of this grid to try to make it look really interesting and make it fit into the composition more. Right now, it does not look very good. So what we want to do is just experiment with the color. So first of all, we'll take our grid, which is right here. Let's just call this grid. And we're going to double click the right side of it, and that's going to give us the layer styles. Remember, all layers have access to layer styles. So there's different styles like bevel and emboss. And so it made it literally look 3D automatically. You click on each one of these, you have a lot of options that you can experiment with. You can give it a stroke. You can give it an inner shadow, an inner glow. You can just experiment with all these on your own. For me personally, I just want to do a color overlay to change the color to sort of match our scene. I kind of like that. I may also give it an outer glow right here. And we could see that we have a lot of options here. Blend mode's on lighten right now. We can change that back to normal. Your outer glow can either be a solid color or it could be a gradient where you can control what it looks like. Let's just do a solid color for now and change it maybe to like a purplish blue, like that. Again, a lot of this is subjective. You can do whatever you wish. We can even do an inner glow. Change this to normal. And we'll take the, let's see, we have opacity there. The size, we can increase. And you can change and experiment with the color. Woo, that's crazy looking, isn't it? Yes, it definitely is. I kind of like it though, but I really don't want it to stand out this much. So we'll hit OK. And by the way, another tip, when you have the Move tool selected, you have Auto Select turned on. You can choose a layer or a group. So this means if you have a ton of layers, but you want to click on an object and you want it to automatically select that layer for you, then you can just do that. So if I click the background, it's going to select the background. If I want to select myself, it's going to select, well, in this case, it's going to select the area that I just clicked on. But if I click on the side of my head where that's not there, it's going to choose the actual layer over there. And if you don't want that to happen, you just uncheck Auto Select Layer. So you click and now it's not going to select anything. There's certain cases where you do want that to happen. So now let's go back to, let's auto select our grid, which is the dark, no, that's not it, sorry, it's the grid right there. And I'm kind of, right now I'm fine. Well, let's go ahead and experiment with some of the layer modes. Now the layer modes, the way these work, if we change these layer modes, it's not really changing the appearance of these, and that's because these have effects applied to them. So what you can do is right click and choose Rasterize Layer Style. And now if we change these layer modes right here, it's going to really change them up a lot. And so just go through them and really see if there's something that you really think looks interesting. Obviously, you can get some really crazy results. For me, as I go through these, I think I kind of probably like this one, but really it is sticking out a lot. It's really changing our composition quite a bit. So I don't want it to stick out quite this much. So there's a number of things you can do. You can change the opacity, scale it down perhaps. We could create a clipping mask on it. So we can create, let's see here, we'll take our brush tool. We can get rid of sections of it to kind of make it look interesting. So if we get a big brush, like let's say 1500, and we do that, that's kind of cool. But what if we don't want it to get rid of everything? Notice how it gets rid of everything there. What if we only wanted to get rid of like 30%? Well, we can change in the brush settings up here, the opacity. So if we just change it maybe to like 50% and then click, now it's not such a crazy degree of getting rid of, you know, these certain grids. But you can keep going through them, left clicking, just to find the right balance if you wish. So that's another thing I really wanted to show you guys. I'm just going to leave it at around 100%. Maybe scale this down to like 1200. Maybe we could fade the top off like that. I think that's a good idea. And then let's come up and make this larger, 1800. I kind of want to get rid of beneath it just a tad bit where my shoulder is and stuff. All right, that works. Come back up to around 1800. Because notice this is taking so much attention from your eye because it's really sticking out so much. So I think I'm going to do that. Just kind of get rid of a big section right there. And there's other things you can do, by the way. For instance, if we right click and duplicate this, it's going to make it even brighter. But you can do things where, for instance, you change like the hue and saturation. And we only want it to affect that layer. Let's see here. Maybe right to right there, the yellow. And then we can do something where we can, let's see. We'll take this. Oops. We'll choose our layer mask on here. We'll make this black so we can get rid of things. I think we'll go down to like 1500. Now we've actually created a situation where we've created light or different hues of this grid. So understanding how to use layers and multiply them, you can really create some awesome looks, essentially, that are a part of your composition. So maybe I'll do a smaller one here, like let's do like 750. No, not 75,000 pixels. You'll kill my computer. Yeah, I think we'll go 550. There we go. So now we kind of have like this streaking effect of sorts. All right, very cool. I like that. I think we'll stick with that just for now. This is still kind of coming out quite a bit on the side here. If we go back to that clipping mask, I think one more time we're going to get a real big brush, like 2200. Maybe I'll fade these out just a bit, do the same thing with this clipping mask or this layer mask right here. Oops, I just loaded something up by accident. So I'm just going back and forth and just having fun with it, really. All right, that's good. I like this so far. Yeah, I loaded up Adobe Premiere by accident. Okay, so now what we want to do is let's get the silhouette of me playing a guitar, which is over here, right here. So left click, drag to the bar up here, and that's going to open up a new one, hopefully. I think my computer's being really slow. All right, there it is. It loaded up, finally. I think I tried to kill my computer by loading Adobe Premiere while Photoshop's loaded, also while screencasting. But anyhow, it's up here, and here I am with my real hair, by the way. I'm not. But what we want to do is cut me out, just a silhouette. And to do that, let's try the object selection tool like we did before. Left click, drag down. All right. So it did a pretty good job just upon first glance, but there are some areas that definitely need fixed, like the guitar neck up here. For one, it is cut off in this shot, so we're gonna have to fix that. But it also didn't select just this top part of my Charvel guitar. So what we'll do is make some fixes. Also, this hair part is just really bad. So we're gonna fix that. Let's fix some of these things now. So mouse scroll wheel plus Alt will zoom us up. You can hold the space bar, left click and drag around. Let's do the part, let's see here. I think we're just gonna use the pen tool in path mode like we were before, just to click and select around these areas. I'm gonna add in the tuners. That's kind of an important part that makes the guitar obvious. And again, nothing. The selection isn't exactly perfect. Add the selection here. Like you can see this part of my thumb. It's like, you know, it's not exactly right there. If you wanted to subtract from a selection, I'll just show you real quickly. Right click, make selection. We can subtract from the selection. We can see there. We want to subtract this from the selection, the part between my leather jacket and the guitar neck. Subtract that. We'll add this. So there's a bunch of adjustments you can make, obviously. We're going to add that. One final area that we'll do is just this little section right here. Kind of helps define the arm a little bit more. Oh, not new selection. I always do that. We will subtract. And then up here, finally, we need to subtract this. All right, and we will subtract that. Now the rest of this, I'm fine with that. We're going to clean up the hair after we get it pasted in. So for this, I'm pretty happy with it. So let's Control C to copy that. And we'll come up to the top and Control V. Looks bad. Yes, it does. So the first thing, I want to flip this horizontally. So Control T, right click, flip horizontal. And we're also going to scale it up just maybe a bit. So for me, I think we're going to put this, so I'm kind of cut off on the side, probably right around, yeah, I'd say there or so. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is fade this into the bottom more. And to do that, I'll create a new layer. And I'm going to grab with the eyedropper tool, which is right here, or hit I to grab that automatically. Just a color down here. And we're going to use the gradient tool. So we click on the paint bucket, left click, drag, and choose the gradient tool. And we want to make sure under basics, we choose foreground to transparent. So whatever's in your foreground color right here, it's going to fade there to transparent. So the way the gradient tool works, we can just left click and drag up. We can hold shift if we want it to be like a perfect 90, 45, 180 degree angle. We want ours to go up. And really, if we want to start here, anything below that is going to be your solid color. I think this is pretty good here because I want to reserve this part for kind of the title area and a little description. So I want it to be higher contrast. All right, that's good. So next up, we have a few other things we want to adjust. For instance, this is cut off. It looks like garbage. So what we can do is I can just eyeball it with the pen tool. This time I want to choose shape. And mine by default has this stroke added to it. I'm going to hit 0 on that. We're just going to use, we'll use that color from recently used color swatches. And I'm going to left click and drag, and I'm just going to guesstimate my headstock shape. Just like that. It's a little bit off, but it's okay. Now, of course, you're looking at this and the color is completely wrong. We have all this noisy grain area because I'm a bad videographer. So what we want to do is we can take this same sort of grain, and it all looks the same exactly, or pretty much, and place it into this section right here, and then we can flatten and make sure this layer is now a part of that layer. So to do that, what we can do is take this, and what I will do is, I think the best way or the easiest way for me that I can think of doing that is to take a elliptical marquee tool. Just come out here in the center, copy it, make sure you're selected on this layer right here, and then I can Control Shift N for a new layer and create a clipping mask inside of this layer right here. Control V to paste it. Use the move tool, deselect auto select layer. We can just click anywhere and move this around. So now, then I can take the clone stamp tool, clone stamp that, alt left click, and then just fill it in. All right, it looks a little bit bulky in my opinion, so I could probably stand to take both of these, Control T. Probably scale it down, I mean, or I can mess with the anchor points, but for me, I'm pretty happy with this. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be too anal about it. So we're going to take this, this, and this. You hold Control and then left click these 3 layers. Control E will merge them, or right click and choose merge layers. And again, we want this to be underneath this little gradient layer. I'll call this fade bottom. All right, so another thing that I want to adjust is the hair. Hair can be a real big pain, and we want to get rid of these areas and just make it look like there's actual strands of hair in this section. So a really great way to get rid of the hair is we want to create a selection around this layer. So the way you do that with any layer contents is to hold Control and left click on the actual little thumbnail in the layer. That creates a marching ants selection around whatever is in the contents of the layer. So for instance, if we wanted to do it up here, auto select myself. If we wanted to create a selection around myself, you hold Control, left click. All right. So that's what we need to do with this section here. Control left click. So now after doing that, we can right click. We'll choose our marquee, and we can right click and choose select in mask. It's going to bring up, it's going to change up your user interface a little bit, and it's going to bring up some tools over here and also some properties over here. Now, if we zoom up, leaving the same settings that are on there now, we can just left click and start to like get rid of some of this hair or the white parts around the hair. We want to keep the hair, but we want to get rid of the other parts. And it works really well just by the default settings. So I'm getting rid of that section here. Maybe this part, clean that up a bit. So like at the top, you can see a little bit of white, like fringing or so around the hair. We can get rid of that stuff. And so you can spend a while, going over this and refining it, but really it's done a good job. So if we take transparency down to 0, this is where we were at. And now this is where we are based on the changes that we made. So very powerful tool. You can, change all these and experiment with these settings on your own. I'm just going to leave it right here as it is. Radius, that's one thing worth checking out. The more you increase this radius, it could affect other areas like on the neck. But we're just going to leave everything pretty much as is. Now, the one thing we do want to do, we want to output the selection to a layer mask and hit OK. There we go. So now we're back to the regular user interface with our layers, and now we've just fixed that part pretty well. All right. So we may come back to this and make some image-based adjustments like the values and all that. But for now, I want to keep on going. And I want to focus on, where did our TV go? I don't think we ever cut that out, did we? Let's go back and do that real quick. So auto select layer, the background, and we can see it says base right here. We're going to move that over. We're going to cut this TV out. So to do that, as we can see, if we zoom up here, we have an issue. The TV is actually this large. It's not just the screen, obviously, but it's pretty much the same value as everything around it. So these quick tools aren't going to work. Very quick and easy way, because it's really just a rectangle, is to use our pen tool in path mode. So we're going to start to where we think the bottom of this thing is. It's kind of like rounded. And if you need to undo, you can always just hit Control Z to undo. Right click, make selection. It's going to be a new selection. With that layer still selected that contains this TV, hit Control C. We'll zoom out. Control D will deselect. Control V will paste it. So now we have a second instance. Uncheck auto select layer here. We can move all around of that. So now we can select. By the way, another tip: if you don't want to have to move your mouse all the way up here and check on auto select, you can just hit Control and then left click on anything, and that will select things automatically as well. So we want to take the background and move it back to where it was, like right there. And then this guy right here, we can move it maybe to right around here off the side. And it pretty much fits in pretty well with the rest of the image. Now, it does look like if we get up closer, it has too much contrast. Everything's more washed out. So we could adjust that in several different ways. Let's rename this to TV. We could, for instance, take out an adjustment layer, window adjustments. Oh, that's right there already. And we could take hue and saturation. It has a lightness value. Oh, make sure it's only selected the TV. And we could possibly make an adjustment there. Maybe like that. It's only +1. That's the tiniest adjustment that you could possibly make. But that way it might fit in just a little bit better. It also looks like there's a little bit of hue of purple in this area from the LED light strip. So we can click back onto this. Double click on this to get your adjustment layer settings back. We can get somewhere maybe. One thing I don't want it to affect is the actual screen. So I think I'm just going to leave that out, that change that I was thinking about. So a lot of this, as you can see, is experimenting, very much so. I may try to add a curves. Make sure it's only selecting there. I think I'm just going to leave it just like that. I'm not even sure if it made a change, but I'm just being real picky about that area up there. Other than that, it looks good anyhow. All right. So now let's have fun with type. So we haven't used the type tool at all, and it's really fun stuff. So the type tool, of course, is T right here, or you hit T on your keyboard. And we are going to just left click once, and we're going to put a caps lock, hello. Now the font I have is something called movie letters. We're going to use that later. The font I want to use right now is a font from right here. It is called Laser Free Font. So let's get up a new browser window. I'm going to go there. All right, so I found this. What I did is I typed in Retrowave fonts, free, and this is one of the Retrowave fonts that came up. So free download, that you have to be registered. I'm sorry, I mentioned the other link that we did had to be registered. I don't think it did, but you have to register in order to download this font if you want to follow along. You can use a different font if you wish, but you want to download this and then install it by double-clicking on your system, and then it will show up in one of your fonts here. So it's called Laser. So I just typed in Lazer at the top, and it's called Laser 84. We can't see it. Let's get it to the very top. And let's also, just for now, make it white. Control T, hold Alt, scale that sucker right up. So I think we're going to make it right around the size right there. So you can also change font size right here. Right now it's like 187. That's what I'm using. And that's looking pretty good right there. Let's go ahead and we can duplicate that. Right click and duplicate the layer, hit OK. Move it down, holding Shift. And we can also put in World, which is the name of the title track. So Control T, I want this one to be a little bit bigger. And it's also going to be in a different font. So the other font that you want to download and install if you're trying to follow along is called Montserrat. It's right here at that URL called Montserrat there. So once you have that installed, we can type in Mont. And I'm going to make Montserrat black. It's going to be very thick. I want to make this all caps, Hello World. So they're two fonts that complement each other pretty well, and it's also in that retrowave sort of aesthetic. Okay, so next up, I kind of want to have both of these skewed. So I'm going to take both, holding Shift or Control and selecting both of these. Hit Control T, right click, and we're going to skew it. So we can skew, we can hold Alt, and it will affect them both ways. Now one thing that looks strange is World isn't italicized, but Hello is. That's kind of annoying me, so I'm going to go back, just select World. There is an italicized version of this font, black italic, but if we look at both of these, I think this one's a little bit more italic in a sense. So I'll take World, hit Control T, right click, and skew. And then if you don't have, by the way, a italic version of a font, you can just do this instead. Just Control T, right click, hit skew, and then just push the sucker over. There we go. So now these are more in line with each other. Notice how this angle is basically equal to that angle. Hello World. We'll also center these up. When you move things around like layers, they will usually give you guides when you're at the center point of the document. This one's a little bit more tricky. So I'm going to take both of these. Now I'm going to hit Control T, right click, skew, maybe just a little bit. Select Move Tool and it applies. Now, it's boring with these being just white, right? I mean, it does contrast well, so in terms of design and graphic design fundamentals, contrast is something that's very important. But we can give this color, and we can use gradients to give it color. So the way we'll do this, we're going to focus on World first. Double click the right side of the layer, we get our layer styles. We can choose a gradient overlay. Now that your default gradient may look something different than mine, but that's okay. We want to use like a chrome sort of look. So if we click this down arrow, it'll give you a bunch of like greens and pastels and blah, blah, blah. Or we can create our own by just left clicking once in this area of the gradient. That brings up this panel, the gradient editor. So this is really fun to play around with. What we want to do is create a hard stop. All right. And so what that means is if we can move these around and then maybe move this over here, this is the opacity. We'll experiment with that in a second. But if I move this next color stop right here, right next to it, it creates a hard stop, which is quite interesting. One problem is notice how the layer inside of it, the gradient, is not aligning to the angle of the text. Hit OK. We can change the angle right here. And it might be a little bit tough to get this right, but around 98 looks just about perfect. It might be off by 1 degree. But we want to move things around over here. I think we want this to be more in the center, yeah. There we go. There's that. And then maybe we'll make this one right here, maybe more of like a purple. All right. Move that back over. And then we'll go ahead and change this one to maybe more of a pinker. So notice I'm moving this around and you can see the real-time preview over here. Maybe this one will be lighter. And you may have to move this up. Kind of like that. All right, I like that. That looks cool. We could also change this maybe to like a gray. See, it's affecting the top. This whiteness, I don't know about that. Maybe just like right around there. There we go. All right, so that looks really cool, has sort of a chrome effect. We can also apply maybe a stroke onto it. So that looks interesting. Here's all my settings if you want to match them up. We're actually having a gradient stroke on here because you can change the fill type to color and it'll just be a solid flat color all the way around. You can change the size and all that good stuff. But you can also make it a gradient. So it goes from like pink to white based on this gradient right here. And you can experiment and change this all up. I'm going to leave it. I kind of actually like that. You can make it thicker if you want. Again, a lot of this is subjective preferences. Let's hit OK. I say this is pretty good for world. I like that. Now for hello, we wouldn't want the same exact, or at least I wouldn't. We wouldn't want the same effects. Like right, for instance, if you ever did, you can right click and choose copy layer styles right there. Then we can take this layer, right click and paste layer style. Ta-da! Works very easily. The thing is, I want to change up the appearance of this so that it's not so redundant. So what I can do, if I choose like purples, we can choose, let's just choose that for now. And then we'll take this. Oh, by the way, I want to hide the stroke. Then we'll take this. We'll make one of them white. Which one do we want to make white? The other one. There we go. We'll take this and make it white. And I just kind of want it to be something subtle like that, really. Nothing too crazy like the bottom one. Hit OK. And well, I think we'll also give it an outer glow. Maybe not quite that purple. We'll drag up the hue a bit. Right around there. So you can match up my settings if you wish, and you can play with them or create your own. So we'll hit OK. Actually, I'm so picky. I didn't want it to be quite that big, so we could change the size right here. That's better. All right, great, great, great stuff. We are getting very close to actually being quite, just about finished with this. I wanted to create an interesting frame because I wanted to let you know that you can create graphics from scratch in Adobe Photoshop. So everything we've been using so far, with exception to the type, has been based on existing photos or assets. So I want to create an interesting sort of frame that goes around, and underneath certain objects to make it an overall more interesting composition. So to do that, I think what we'll do is take the line tool. You can see you have a rectangle tool, ellipse tool, polygon, custom shape tool. We're just going to use the line tool because I just want a border. And we're going to, let's see here. I'm not sure exactly where we're going to place this. I think maybe just on top of dark fade. And I'm just going to create a line by holding shift, left clicking, dragging up. Now it takes it blue because it's automatically select the path that makes up that line. But if you choose the pen tool, I mean, not the pen tool, the move tool or V on your keyboard, that goes away. We can't really see it because it's black and it's only 1 pixel. So if we choose like our line tool again, or like the direct selection tool as it's called, we can change up this stuff right here. So right now it has a fill that is this black color. We can make it like this pink color instead. So now we can kind of see it a little bit better. But really, I want to focus right now on getting it to really glow. So I'm going to double click. We're going to give it a outer glow. Ooh, look at that. So it's already really kind of standing out. Strokes and a lot of these other layer styles can have their own blend modes, just like layers can have their own blend modes. So if we take this, we can choose darken, we can choose color dodge, all of these, and it really changes the appearance and how it interacts with the background or whatever's behind it. For now, I'm just going to hit normal. I want this to be pretty beefy sort of glow. Maybe right around there. So the spread's 14, the size is 51. That's pretty good. And then we'll hit OK. And for now, we're just going to hide that, or we don't have to necessarily. I want to create the other lines though. So one thing in graphic design to pay attention to, if you have a border, you want it to have equal white space or negative space as it's called from like this border, from the border line itself to the outside of the document. And you want that to be all around, all the way around, the same amount of white space. So right here, this amount is how much we want it to be from the top border down. So it's going to be probably, I'd say right around here. It's actually going to be a little bit closer in. I'll probably move the other one to compensate for that. Let's make sure you have the whole document top rocking. You know what? I think maybe what I'll do instead is take the direct selection tool. What the direct selection tool allows you to do is to select anchor points as a part of your shapes, your shape layers, like your line right here, and we can move them around. I think right from here would be probably ideal. So then what we'll do is, actually, let me see here. This operation will turn a live shape into a regular path. Continue. I don't think that really matters too much. I'm going to hit yes. What I can do is right click now and duplicate this layer. And we'll move it over to like an equal distance on the right. I know this border is way too crazy right now. We're going to tone it down a lot, but I'm just trying to get it into place, equal distance or so. And then direct selection tool. We're going to make this one go down way farther. Probably right around here. And I want it to come up and match up with that one. For now, I'm also going to take our first one, right click and duplicate it. This one, I'm going to hit Control T, hold Shift and make sure it is a straight line. Select Move Tool, move it into place so that it's matching up with that one right there. You can also, usually I was using the direct selection tool to pull that over, but you can also hit Control T and scale it over to the right. All right, now this one's fading off because it's behind this fade layer right here. Just to be aware of that. I think I don't want that to happen. Let's see, we'll have to rethink about how we position our elements here. So what we'll do is we'll take our 3 shapes and just put them to the very top, or almost the very top. There we go. And then we will finally I'll just right click the first one, duplicate it, bring this over, and Control T. And I kind of want it to follow the same flow as that. So then I can take the direct selection tool, move this over, probably put it like right there. There. All right, so that's the look I was going after, but really it's sticking out way too much. So what we'll do is, let's see here. I want this TV to be in front of that layer to make it look more interesting. So Control, left click, we'll select it. We'll take all the TV stuff, and we're left clicking and just dragging until we get to the top. So now the TV's in front of it just to create depth. And also I want it to end our first line right here, our shape. I want it to end, we'll take the direct selection tool, just that bottom anchor point right there on top of the head, essentially. Now finally, we can take all this stuff right here and merge it into a layer. So I took all four, right click, you can hit merge layers or hit Control E, and now it's all one shape. All right, so now it's sticking out way too much, and we can solve this issue in a few different ways. I kind of like the outer glow. I know I don't want to go back and change it, so I'm going to destructively rasterize the layer style that bakes it into it. And I can also change the blend mode to see if there's a certain blend mode that I like. I kind of like that one. So I think going back to the other one that I had, which was I think right there, which is linear dodge add. That looks pretty cool. I'm going to create a mask on it, layer mask. Take our brush tool. 2200 is pretty big at the moment. Let's try like 1500. And I'm going to get rid of just certain parts of it that I think look interesting. And if you don't want it to get rid of 100%, change the opacity down like to 70. So I'm just left clicking and just getting rid of parts. All right. For me, I kind of like that. Yeah. If we hit Control T, we can also scale it a little bit differently if we want. You may have to make adjustments to it though. But I think I'm just going to leave it right there. All right, so finally, to sum this up, we'll be done in a few steps. Let's take a new type layer. So get the type tool or hit T, left click, and we're going to put some text. Hacking 2020 from 1983 dash with JavaScript 0.1. All right, Control T will scale it. Hold Alt while scaling to make sure it doesn't really skew or screw up the type and all that. And so now what we want to do is use a movie font, and that's this one right here. So we have, it's called Movie Letters. Go to that URL at defont.com, download it, install it. It's called, what was it called? Movie Letters. All right, so it has that real crazy thin type. I'm going to make it white or near white. Here we go. All right, so the final thing there's two final things I want to do. There is some grain in this photo already. We could leave it exactly as it is. It would still be a good composition. But if we wanted to make a little bit more interesting and really make it look retro, like it's old, like it's like an old movie poster, we can add some grain to it. So let's add a new layer, Control Shift N, hit enter. And we're just going to fill it with like this pink color. Then we're going to go to filter, and you have a bunch of filters that you can use as well. We didn't really touch on many, but we can add a noise filter. We'll add a noise to this. So I have a mount of 140%. That looks pretty good to me. You can experiment between distribution of uniform and Gaussian. You can also choose monochromatic. I think I like that. Let's hit OK. And then we can change the blend mode. So we double click in here, and we'll hit the down arrow key. And to see how this is affecting the overall look and feel. Now, this one's insane, right? But you could still do something like change the opacity down to like 10% or less. And now you just have that really fine grain. So if I zoom up, look all the grain, and then I hide this layer. So it's clean, but now it has grain. 8% would probably be just too much, so maybe like 5. And then you just have a very soft grain layer over everything. Next thing that you could do to really bring everything and finalize your composition as you wish is at the very top of your layers, you can add adjustment layers to really change every layer beneath it in the entire composition itself. So we could do curves if we wish. If we want to push things up, make them brighter, which may be worth it possibly if you really want to make it look kind of washed out and retro. And you can play around by adding other points in here, of course. You can really change things based on what you're doing in there. And then we could also do like a photo filter. So a photo filter, you have these warming filters with a density. That's really going to make things warm. I don't really want that. You can, instead of using a filter, you can use a specific color. So if we want it to be like cooler, we can make it blue, change the density. You can, let me go through the filters and look at some of these. Warming filter. We can hit the down arrow key, of course, to go through these. Sepia, I think that's interesting. I think right around there is fine. So the two changes we made, if we take them off, here's our curves, which barely changed anything. And then also this sepia-based photo filter. And then you can add any of these other ones to really change up your composition. So there we are. I'm pretty satisfied with the overall image that we were able to create from scratch. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that as much as I did. Again, if you are an absolute beginner, your head's probably spinning right now because there's a lot of features that I just introduced you to. I would suggest watching my video again or watching other crash courses, and eventually through repetition, you will start to understand and everything will start to make sense. All right, so as always, make sure to subscribe because I'm always putting out 2 to 3 videos per week. And also check out, I'll probably link it here if it's available yet, my Retrowave music video, which is what the poster was based on. I will see you guys real soon. Goodbye.